This is a hot take, but if Anthony Richardson does not play this week, then I would feel comfortable picking up and playing Joe Flacco.
Flacco pulls it back, puts some air under it. Wide open is Pierce. Massive breakdown. And it's Pierce in. Touchdown. Joe Flacco brings them all the way back.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. In today's video, we're going to look at start and sit decisions for Week 8. We're also going to talk guys that are under 40% rostered right now, which ones that you want to start for this week and which ones that you want to stash for this week. And then we're going to answer some questions from the fans that have commented on this channel. So if you are new here, if you leave a comment, I will reply to it. I reply to all my commenters, and you get to be featured on the show. So comment, subscribe to this channel, join in, and I'm going to answer all your questions to help you win a fantasy football championship this season. All right, so what we're going to do first is we're going to talk the guys that are under 40% rostered. So we're going to talk a quarterback, a running back, a wide receiver, a tight end, and a flex that you want to stash and one that you want to start as well. So we've been doing this the past few weeks. So we'll start with the quarterback. The quarterback that I would be trying to stash for this week is Derek Carr. Derek Carr should be coming back next week in Week 9. He is still on IR, still dealing with injuries, and obviously that team has still got a lot of problems right now that they got to work through. But you can't deny that when they were healthy, Derek Carr was an extremely productive fantasy football quarterback. And to make matters better, they have an excellent fantasy football playoff schedule. They have Washington in Week 15, Green Bay in Week 17. It's kind of difficult, but at the same time, they're a very passable defense that teams have had success against. And then in Week 17 in the championship game, they get the Las Vegas Raiders, one of the worst defenses in fantasy football. So if you have the ability to get Derek Carr, especially if you're in a 2-quarterback league and people have dropped him, make sure that you're picking him up and stashing him because he could be a very valuable asset for the stretch run. He's only 12.1% rostered right now in ESPN leagues. Who would you start among the quarterbacks for this week? So the quarterback that I'm looking to start is Bo Nix against the Carolina Panthers. The Carolina Panthers are a terrible defense, and if you look at Bo Nix, he has been steadily getting better each and every week. He gives you some decent rushing value as well. Over the past 5 weeks, he has scored in double digits, and there's been 3 out of 5 games where he's had at least 19 points. So looking at this matchup against Carolina, we saw what Marcus Mariota did to them last week. He finished as a top 10 quarterback. Now we have Bo Nix coming to face this defense, and I foresee that he will be an excellent streaming option for this week, going up against the 29th best defense against quarterbacks, but obviously beat up right now, and their offense is not going to do them any favors with some injuries that they have on offense. Bryce Young is starting again. All of this sets up well for Bo Nix to be a great streaming option for this week. So a deep league honorable mention that I want to shout out as well is Jameis Winston. So Jameis Winston is only 3.1% rostered. And real quick before I go to that, Bo Nix is only 34% rostered. So he's out there in about 2/3 of leagues. So Jameis Winston, though, is only 3% rostered. And if you're in deep leagues, Jameis is an interesting option to... I wouldn't start him for this week unless you're really in a pinch, but I think that he can be serviceable. Because what Jameis Winston historically has been throughout his career, if anything, is a pass-happy quarterback, gives you a ton of volume passing through the air. Cleveland has recently rearranged their play-calling duties to be more pass-oriented now that they've got Jameis Winston there. They're going to be adjusting some of their plays, and this sets up well for him to have against Baltimore, which is the 30th ranked defense. He could be serviceable this week to throw in if you're in a pinch and you need a quarterback start. Obviously, not somebody that I'm looking to start if you have to, but I think Jameis could be serviceable, and I think there'll be games this season where he could be fantasy relevant because of his ability to get the ball down the field. And we'll be talking more about some of these Browns throughout this video that could benefit from having Jameis as their quarterback now. All right, running backs to stash that are under 40% rostered. So the one that I'm looking at to stash, who's only 11% rostered right now in ESPN leagues, is Roschon Johnson. So he was likely dropped after his bye week, and respectably, because when they weren't playing, I don't think it was necessary to hold on to him. But now that he's coming back, DeAndre Swift has had some question marks throughout the season. He's been better as the season's gone along, but Roschon Johnson is a younger player. They have more equity built with him, and it's possible that in the second half of the season after the bye that he could get more involved. He gets a passable defense this week that could be a decent matchup in Washington. And I wouldn't start him this week because I don't think that he's going to get the volume necessary to be a starter. But at the same time, I think that this could be a great second half sleeper. And especially if anything happens to Swift, he is a potential home run play in fantasy. So who would you start among the running backs that are less than 40% rostered? And this is a potentially dangerous sounding play. But if Travis Etienne does not play this week, then D'Ernest Johnson would be my start among the running backs. He is only 8.7% rostered. And yes, D'Ernest Johnson has been not particularly reliable this season because he is the third running back on this team. He did have an okay game a couple weeks back. But what I really like about D'Ernest Johnson is that he is the pass-catching running back on this team. Jacksonville this week gets Green Bay. And, last week against New England, that was a Tank Bigsby game where he was able to, they were just able to keep giving him the rock and he was able to keep running it down the field, churning clock. But Bigsby does not really give you very much in terms of passing volume. D'Ernest Johnson, on the other hand, though, is the pass-catching running back on this team. And I suspect in this game that Green Bay is going to get out early on Jacksonville and they're going to be playing from behind. So I'm suspecting this to be a poor Tank Bigsby game if Etienne doesn't play. Well, even if Etienne does play, I don't think it's going to be a good Tank Bigsby game. But if Etienne is out, then D'Ernest Johnson, especially in PPR formats, I think he's going to collect a lot of short yardage passes, pad his stats a little bit with some receptions, and he could be a very solid streaming option if you were really in a pinch at running back in deep leagues. Some other guys that I want to shout out as well at the running back position. Justice Hill could be serviceable this week too as a deep league handcuff for Baltimore. Obviously, I don't like him as much as Johnson because I think that Cleveland is going to be not a very challenging defense for Baltimore and that Derrick Henry should be able to run over them. But in the event that they do need to pass the ball on third down plays, Justice Hill is a viable option who's had success this season and could be a streaming option if worse comes to worse. But the biggest thing I want to point out among honorable mention running back stashes are the handcuffs. There's a lot of handcuffs that are getting dropped, and this is exactly the time of year where if you have an elite running back like a Breece Hall, Braylon Allen is only 25% rostered right now. If you have a Kenneth Gainwell, if you own Saquon Barkley, he is only 1.4% rostered. Let's say you have Alvin Kamara and you could pick up Williams. He is only 3.8% rostered. Jamal Williams, he's only 3.8% rostered. So if you have one of these elite running backs, it's better for you at this stage in the season to roster somebody that is your specific handcuff than somebody who's on the fringe like an Alexander Madison, a D'Ernest Johnson, guys like that I'm talking about in this video, because these handcuffs are really where the value is at in case your elite guys get injured. All right, wide receiver. So who would I stash among the wide receivers for this week? And this may be controversial because a lot of people would be recommending to start this player, but I would not be comfortable starting him just yet. This is Jalen McMillan of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And granted, they are really in need of a wide receiver right now with the injuries to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. And McMillan had 8 targets last week, which is attractive in that, he's getting some targets. But at the same time, he really didn't do very much with them. He only had 3 for 15. And yes, 8 targets does look good, and I do like that as somebody that I'm interested in rostering. But I am not convinced right now that this Tampa Bay team is going to give it to Jalen McMillan at that same level and that he's going to be productive with it in this next game against Atlanta, who Atlanta actually played them pretty well in their matchup earlier this season. And they didn't, even though they had a lot of points, they didn't really have necessarily a lot of passing yards. So I'm looking more in terms of Tampa Bay at Cade Otton, who I'll talk about a little bit later, and the running backs is the ones that will really be the better factors of the targets from Baker Mayfield. McMillan is interesting, and I think there's a possibility he has a good game, but I wouldn't really try to put him out there because I think this is very much a boom-bust play. But somebody that I would be looking to start if he is available based on the formula I talked about earlier with Jameis Winston is Cedric Tillman of the Cleveland Browns. So this is an example of somebody who gets increased targets with the absence of a player, in this case Amari Cooper getting traded, and he was very productive with it. 8 for 81 on 12 targets. And yes, I do think this offense in terms of the passing game is going to revolve around David Njoku, but Cedric Tillman's performance here, especially heading into this matchup against Baltimore, and now having Jameis as his quarterback who loves to pass the ball down the field and is pretty good at getting the ball down the field despite his turnover issues that are well documented. So this sets up well for a decent streaming option for Cedric Tillman. He is 14% available. You look at Jalen McMillan, who's 38% available, likely grabbed by a lot of people. But I think the smarter play for this week that's actually less rostered is Cedric Tillman. And then guys that I want to shout out as well, Demario Douglas of the New England Patriots. And I was wrong about this. I had him as a start last week. But I will say in fairness that he did get sick. But he was getting involved early in that game. He caught 2 catches on the first drive. Apparently after that, he just didn't feel right enough to go out there and continue playing. But when he was playing, he was the one getting targeted early and obviously has good rapport with Drake May. He's somebody that's probably dropped in a lot of places after how he played last week. And I would be willing to pick him up and stash him because I think there's a good possibility that he's valuable in the second half of the season. All right, now at tight end. This is a player that I've talked about before in terms of the stashes that I would be trying to stash at tight end. But given that his quarterback right now is Bryce Young, I would probably not want to play him. It is JaTavion Sanders of the Carolina Panthers. And believe it or not, this guy, I know that he's not highly rostered, but it really surprised me that he's only 0.5% rostered in ESPN. And this is a guy over the past few weeks has been playing pretty well relative to his expectations. He's had at least 5 targets the past 3 weeks. You like rookie tight ends to get more target volume as they mature in the offense and learn the system. And his receptions are going up too. This past week, he had 6 for 61, total of 12.1 points if you're playing full PPR format, which is actually better than a lot of tight ends that you had been probably relying on that have been struggling. So yes, they're playing Denver, and yes, Bryce Young is their quarterback, but this is somebody that I definitely want to stash because Deontay Johnson is in trade rumors. Adam Thielen is injured. They've got a lot of question marks after that in terms of receiving options. So this is somebody that I would be looking to stash in deep leagues and keep an eye on to see what happens. And then the tight end that I would start for this week, and maybe this is a little bit of a cheat because he's 40.6% rostered, but you know, close enough to 40. Hunter Henry of the New England Patriots. So the thing I like about Henry is that he's gotten some good target volume with Drake May. I think that in this game against the Jets, they're going to, again, be behind in this game. And, you know, the Jets have some good cornerbacks like Sauce Gardner that I think could potentially lock up the receivers. That's why I think Demario Douglas could struggle in this game. But I think this sets up well for Hunter Henry to have a lot of receptions for this particular week, and I would recommend it if you can to start Hunter Henry. All right, and then flex players. So I'm going to go with receivers here, but flex could really apply to any other position. There's 2 players I want to mention that I would try to stash, so a little bit of a bonus here. Troy Franklin, who is 2.5% rostered in Denver. He's playing Carolina this week, so a great matchup. He led them in targets last week, but I probably would not recommend starting him because I think there's better options for this particular week. I think if you're in a pinch, maybe he could be a starter, but this is a situation where I think Cortland Sutton is going to benefit from this particular game. And Franklin, I think he will have a solid game that can be reliable, but I don't think he gives you the elite floor necessarily. Another guy I would try to stash is Ricky Pearsall. Ricky Pearsall, if Deebo Samuel misses especially, this guy sets up as the #1 wide receiver. He's only 18.6% rostered. And going up against Dallas, which is a tough defense, but definitely vulnerable. Think about what happened when Deebo, Brandon Ayuk were out, and Juwan Jennings was the starting receiver. That was back in week 3. He scored 46 points. And I'm not saying Ricky Pearsall is going to do that, but I'm saying that if Deebo is out again, I could see him being very good for this week. It's risky, but I think that he's somebody that I would feel comfortable starting if you can. But the reason I have him as a stash is because I think the safest and best start for this week among my flex wide receivers is Rashod Bateman. And yes, Bateman is, he's one of the definitions of inconsistency throughout his career, but the numbers don't lie in terms of how productive he's been over the past 3 weeks. And especially in a matchup here against Cleveland, which is only the 27th ranked pass defense. I think this sets up well again for Bateman to be a good streaming option, gets a long touchdown potentially, because they just got tore up by Cincinnati last week. Cleveland is not as good on defense as they once were last year. So we're looking at Bateman. Over the past 3 weeks, he's had 4 receptions in each game. And in terms of fantasy points, he's had 15, 11, and 22 in full PPR. So sometimes and he's only 21% rostered still. So sometimes the best starts can just be the safest play. And I think Bateman, if you have him, I think this is a good safe play to start him among the lightly rostered players. All right, now we will move to start, sit, and stash for each game this week. And I'm going to go rapid fire through this because we have all the teams playing in this week and a lot to get through before our mailbag. But we'll go a start, a sit, and a stash for each game, unless otherwise noted. All right, first we'll start with the morning games. We got Philadelphia and Cincinnati. So in this particular game, among the players that I would start, I'm going to advocate for you to start Devonta Smith and Chase Brown. I know they both had tough games this past week. They didn't play well, but in terms of Smith, Cincinnati is not a great pass defense. Look at how Cleveland did against them last week with Cedric, Tillman, Jerry Jeudy, and Njoku, etc. I think Smith will have a good game in week 8. And then Chase Brown, I know he's got a tough matchup against Philly this week, but I think that he is the lead running back, and I think that he will be utilized in the short passing game. So I think that you will see a bounce back performance from Chase Brown. I would not go as far in terms of the Philadelphia pass catching options to start Grant Calcetera. He would be my sit for this week. If he is somebody that you're even considering playing in place of Goddard, because Dallas Goedert, for one, has not been reliable. And then 2, Calcetera's numbers primarily came off of 1 big catch. So yeah, this is an obvious sit for me. Other guys I've mentioned are Zach Moss, etc. Stash candidates for this week. I mentioned him a little bit earlier. Kenneth Gainwell, especially if you own Saquon Barkley. This is a high upside play. If anything were to happen to Saquon, Kenneth Gainwell becomes an immediate potential lottery ticket. He's only 1.4% rostered. I would try to be stashing him around this time, especially if you have Saquon. Baltimore and Cleveland. I would go back to starting Mark Andrews, and I was down on him for quite a while. But again, the numbers don't lie that he has been productive these past few weeks, and he does get a solid matchup against Cleveland again. So Mark Andrews over the past few weeks has been getting more involved in the red zone. And I know Cleveland as a defense in general is 4th against tight ends, but I still say it's a good matchup because teams in general have had success moving the ball against this defense. And I think that Mark Andrews will continue to get involved again. And I think that just among other tight end options that are out there, I think Mark Andrews is one of the better ones. I would feel comfortable starting this week based on how he's been performing the last few weeks. He's gotten 3 touchdowns over the past 2 games. I would keep trying to roll with the Flames and put Mark Andrews out there again. I would sit Nick Chubb, though. I think this sets up to be a difficult game for him against the Baltimore run defense that is effective. Nick Chubb is not the best pass-catching running back, And I think this overall sets up as the guy that you want to be sitting for this week. But again, I would be stashing these Cleveland wide receivers. If you're in deep leagues, definitely look to start Tillman. Jeudy, I'm not really too high on starting unless you I would prefer to start Tillman over Jeudy, to be honest. But I think both these guys are definitely people that should be rostered in most formats, except for the very shallow leagues, because of the potential upside that they could have with Jameis. Tennessee and Detroit. So who would you start? I want to give you the confidence that you could go back to starting Sam Laporta. And yes, this has been a tough season for the Laporta owners, especially with the capital invested in him. But I think there's a great opportunity now that Jameson Williams is suspended for Sam Laporta to have increased opportunities again. We could see a big uptick in targets. And I think against this Tennessee defense that is vulnerable, to say the least, in the passing game, I think that Sam Laporta could benefit from this and could be a solid start for this week. I like him as a bounce back candidate. I'd be sitting Calvin Ridley, and you may be tempted because of the DeAndre Hopkins trade to start him for this week because he's the only wide receiver in Detroit. Numbers-wise, has been good against wide receivers, but I'm not putting Calvin Ridley into my starting lineup again until he shows me that he can put up good numbers with the quarterback play that they have right now. Yes, he has gotten a lot of targets the past 2 weeks, and he's got a great schedule to close the season, so you definitely want to roster him, but I would not be starting him this week. You do want to stash on the Titans Tajee Spears as well. He was somebody that was dropped in a lot of leagues, but he's a talented running back who could potentially eat into Tony Pollard's touches as the season goes along, and he's a great pass-catching running back who was successful before his injuries. So Tajee Spears, if he's out there, I would try to stash him. We could see more of him involved in this game this week. Indianapolis and Houston. Have confidence to start the Houston receivers again this week. Stefon Diggs, I think even though he had a tough game week 7, I think week 8 we will see a bounce back performance. Tank Dell, tougher to trust him, but I think that you can put him back into your flex and he would be serviceable for this week. So I think both these guys, I like this bounce back performances. Sit pretty much all of the Colts pass catchers, in my opinion, with Anthony Richardson as quarterback. We're starting to see a little more of Michael Pittman involved with Anthony Richardson, but against Houston, which is a tough defense, I think that Michael Pittman will struggle this game. I would be sitting him. Stash. And this player has a question that we're going to talk about his long-term value with in a little bit. But Tyler Goodson is somebody that I'd be trying to stash because Jonathan Taylor has a well-documented injury history over the past few seasons. Goodson has been effective now and has basically overtaken Sermon as the secondary running back on this team. So if you have Jonathan Taylor, I'd be stashing Tyler Goodson. But even if you are in a deep league, I think Goodson is a good stash in case anything happens to Taylor again. Green Bay and Jacksonville. So Jacksonville, one of the worst pass-catching defenses against wide receivers and tight ends this week. So because of that, Tyler Kraft is my start for this week. I think that he has a good opportunity. And again, I think you can put guys like Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs back in your lineup too with confidence, and these would both be great plays. Sits, I already kind of talked about him, but Tank Bigsby would maybe my sit, even if Etienne doesn't play, because I think that they're going to be down in this game, and Bigsby doesn't really give you a lot in terms of passing volume. I know Green Bay is an okay matchup for defenses in terms of running the ball, but I just think that this sets up poorly for Bigsby to be successful this week. Stash candidates. So Marshawn Lloyd was dropped by a lot of people. He was the secondary running back in Green Bay that had an injury. He's been on IR, but he should be coming back in the next few weeks. And I think that he's somebody that could be a good second half stash because Green Bay likes to involve 2 running backs. We've seen Emmanuel Wilson have some success in fantasy. So Marshawn Lloyd, in my opinion, will be somebody that we see similar success with. And even if Jacobs gets injured again, this is a potential lottery ticket. Arizona, Miami. So some difficult questions here, but I want to give you 2 receivers that I'd be starting for this week, despite how they played lately. Jalen Waddle and Marvin Harrison Jr. Jalen Waddle, I would be starting for this week because in the one game where Tua was healthy, Waddle had over 100 yards. He had 8 targets. He had an exceptional game. And even in this most recent game against Indianapolis, he still had 8 targets. So he was still he's still getting involved in this offense. He just needs more competent quarterback play. And now that Tua comes back, I think this is a game against a poor Arizona pass defense that you will see Waddle have more success. And Marvin Harrison Jr., yes, he has struggled a lot over the last few weeks. And yes, Miami is the #1 defense against wide receivers in terms of fantasy points allowed. But I do think that is kind of suspect because a lot of times Miami has just been so bad at, running in terms of their offense that they really just don't have the teams that are going against them. Their run defense is so bad, and their offense has not been able to move the ball down the field. So teams are just basically running the ball out on them and just able to use that run defense. So in terms of the how they've done against receivers, I think that when you see more of the offense back, and now that you have the ability to play catch up against these guys with Tua, etc., now back on this team, I think that you'll see Arizona attacking more through the air. And I think that this could be an opportunity. Marvin Harrison Jr. is still the best wide receiver on this team. He's just not been on the same page with Kyler so far, but I think this is he still has too much upside. I would not be trying to sit him for this week, and I think that he could give you decent value despite the fact that he's struggled. Sit Jonnu Smith. He had a good game last week for the Dolphins with Tyler Huntley, but now that Tua is back, his preferences are going to be back to the wide receivers. And then stash candidates, Jalen Wright to me would be somebody to stash because Etienne and Mostert have both dealt with injuries throughout their careers. Short career for Etienne, but Wright has a lot of potential. And if these guys get injured, especially now with Tua being back, Wright could be a sleeper if anything happens to these running backs. The Jets and the Patriots. So again, this is a confidence start. I would go back to starting Devonta Adams. I know he struggled and he probably hurt a lot of people this week, but I think this is where he gets the chemistry back. And even Aaron Rodgers in deeper quarterback leagues, I would be willing to start Aaron Rodgers for this week. I think that he develops some rapport again with Devonta Adams, and I think this is the bounce back week for the Jets. This sets up perfectly to me as the Ramondre Stevenson sit game, as it's been for quite a while. I think that he struggles in this game, and he's somebody that you do not want to be playing this week. And I already mentioned Demario Douglas as a stash that you want to hold on to because of the potential volume that he has with this offense. Dealt with injuries or illness last week, but I think he gets back on the pine and has some good performances moving forward. All right, we'll pick up the pace a little bit. Atlanta and Tampa Bay. I would be starting Cade Otton among the tight ends. I think he's going to get a lot of targets for this week. He's a very safe play. So in terms of both Laporta and guys that I mentioned earlier, like Laporta, Kraft, I would prefer Otton, to be honest. But I do think, and even Hunter Henry, I think that Otton will have a great game this week because I think that Baker is going to struggle to get the ball down the field to receivers, and Otton is going to be the primary receiving target. And that being said, I would sit these quarterbacks, both Baker Mayfield and Cousins. Cousins had that great game on Thursday night against Tampa Bay a couple weeks back, but this game is going to be more of a rainy game. So that's why part of why I like that more of that short game, because we're suspecting some rain. I think we get the tight ends and the running backs more involved, and that kind of hurts the quarterback's overall passing value. Stash Sterling Stepper on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We're getting a lot of hype on the McMillans on this team, the running backs, but pay attention to the veterans like Sterling Shepard, who's had involvement from time to time, but he's experienced. They may lean on him a little more than we may expect, and he could be relevant in this offense with the injuries. New Orleans and the Chargers. This is a tough game to pick who to play because these defenses have been successful and the offenses have had some struggles. But I think you could return to confidence 3 players, and these are probably the only 3 I would play. Lad McConkey, Chris Olave, and J.K. Dobbins. I think all of them are good plays for this week. They all have decent matchups. Olave, I think, and McConkey, for that matter, that they're both going to get the clear target volumes on their teams. All three of those guys are good starts. Do not be tempted by these tight ends, Taysom Hill coming back or Will Disley off of last week. So these guys are both sits. I would also be sitting the Josh Palmers, who may fill in for additional volume in the absence of Quentin Johnson, because he's not been productive this season, and I think that it'd be too risky. Stash Kamani Vidal. I've talked about him as a good running back stash before, but I think with the Dobbins injury history, New Orleans is also a bad run defense, and maybe Vidal is somebody that has a good game in the fourth quarter and could have a good overall fantasy finish, so keep an eye out for him. Buffalo and Seattle. So one of the better receiver starts that you can get this week. He's right around 50% rostered, so he didn't qualify for my list. But Tyler Lockett. He's had at least 6 targets the last 5 weeks, and now DK Metcalf is not expected to play. Buffalo has struggled against pass catchers at times this season, and I think that this is a chance where Tyler Lockett gets back into the picture of having a good game this week. I like him a little more than JSN, but I think that Tyler Lockett gives you a good safe value that will be reliable in week 8. I would be sitting Khalil Shakir, though. I know he had a good game last week where he was 7 of 7 in terms of his targets, receptions, and quite a bit of yards as well. I have to double check exactly how many he had. But I think we're going to see some target distribution that shifts to Cooper Moore that we didn't see in the past game. I think we're going to see a little more running from James Cook, some more involvement with him. And then Kincaid, I think this is a good matchup for him against the Seattle tight ends. So I think all this sets up as if Shakir is going to kind of be left out. I see a disappointing game for this week. Stash Geno Smith in the shallow quarterback leagues where you need a bye week replacement. So a couple of guys on bye in week 9, most notably Purdy for San Francisco. If you're in a situation where you have him or you're dealing with quarterbacks that are playing inconsistently, Geno Smith could be a solid stash. He gets his the Los Angeles Rams, which have been a pretty good defense for a good matchup for quarterbacks. And he's a number 6 quarterback on the season, surprisingly. So Geno has been great value and still heavily available. Carolina and Denver. So with Bryce Young, you really can't feel comfortable starting any Panther, but I do want to give you the confidence that you could start Chuba Hubbard. And I don't feel great about it, but Chuba has gotten a lot of volume, and I foresee that Bryce Young will have a hard time getting the ball past 10 yards down the field. So because of that, who does he have to throw it to? Well, Chuba Hubbard. So if you're in a full PPR league, I think Chuba Hubbard is still startable. I would also go back to starting Cortland Sutton, and then obviously Williams. What is his first name? Javonte Williams. Sorry. A brain fart there. But Javonte Williams is obviously a great start for this week. Cortland Sutton is a great bounce back candidate. Those are obvious starts. But again, sit these guys for the Panthers that, with Deontay Johnson missing, you may be tempted to think Xavier Legette could step up, but he's going to drop Patrick Surtain, and I think that's just going to be a nightmare for Legette. I think there's a better chance that Legette has a 0 this week than he has a touchdown. And then JaTavion Sanders is the stash that I've already talked about earlier from the Panthers, because I'm going to be monitoring this game with Bryce Young to see what his tendencies are, especially after learning from Dalton the past few weeks, and see if anything's changed. Kansas City and Las Vegas. So great week for these two running backs. Kareem Hunt gets a great matchup. He's a must start for this week. And Alexander Mattison, to me, is also a very solid start option. So if you're picking between Mattison and Hubbard, who I just talked about, I would go Mattison because I think that he's going to get a little more passing volume in terms of just better quarterback play and competency. So Mattison, this team is again going to be behind, and they're going to need to rely on their pass catching running backs. And Mattison, to me, is going to be somebody that they lean on heavily. Him and Hubbard are both not great starts, but I would lean Mattison over them. But they're both guys that I would be starting for this week, given the opportunity, especially in PPR leagues. But again, do not be tempted. Sit Patrick Mahomes for this week. I'm telling you, this game, I know they get Las Vegas this week, and if there is any argument to start Patrick Mahomes off of some really rough stretches for the past year and change, I don't see it changing this week. I think it's going to, even with DeAndre Hopkins coming in, I still don't see these performances changing. I think he's going to give you around 15 points. He's going to be mediocre. There's better options. I would go Bo Nix over Patrick Mahomes. Stash Trey Tucker. I've said this before. I think that he's going to continue to get more involvement. He got 8 targets last week. This is somebody that I think is going to eventually take over as the number 1 wide receiver. Chicago and Washington. A lot depends on Jaden Daniels' health, but I would be trying to start Cole Kmet for this week. He's got clear rapport with Caleb Williams. He's gotten at least 5 targets the past 4 games, and in 3 of the past 4, he's had at least 7 targets. So Cole Kmet has been very involved, and I expect that rapport to continue with Caleb Williams. He's got a tough matchup against Washington, but Kmet is still a great start. And then Rome Odunze would be my sit for this week. I think somebody's going to be left out of this Bears pecking order, and Odunze to me is 4th on that pecking order. So too much of a risk. I know they get Washington, which is a good pass defense, but I would be sitting Rome Odunze. Stash Marcus Mariota because these rib injuries, it sounds like Jaden Daniels is doing well, but sometimes these rib injuries take longer than expected to recover from. Mariota looked effective. If you're in a deep 2-quarterback league and you have Jaden Daniels, I'd be stashing Marcus Mariota. All right, Dallas and San Francisco. We get into these night games. So I'd be returning to starting Dak Prescott. He's very effective historically off of his bye, and San Francisco has been good, but I do think that Dak is going to be able to get the ball spread around with them. I do like a bounce back for Jake Ferguson, another great start candidate, and Rico Dowdle I think will have some effectiveness as well. I think this will be a good game for the 3 of them. CeeDee Lamb will have a bounce back, but I want to highlight Dak specifically because he's probably been dropped in a lot of places. I think you can return to him being a starter for this week. I would sit Debo. Even if he does play, I think there's a good chance that he's going to be a decoy. He's dealing with multiple injuries. I think this does not set up well to be a good Debo Samuel game, even if he does play. But as I said, stash Ricky Pearsall. Keep an eye on that situation with Debo to see if he's going to play. There's not a lot of pivot options. That's part of the reason why I would sit him, is because at that point you really don't have a lot left of guys that you could pivot to. But Pearsall is somebody that I would be trying to stash. And Jawan Jennings, too. He's going to have an injury and then a bye week next week. So he's probably getting dropped in a lot of places. But obviously a great pickup this next week. And then the Giants and Pittsburgh closing this out. Final game of the weekend. I would go back to starting Malik Neighbors and George Pickens. Those are both great starts for this week. Neighbors had a down week. Pickens had a great week. I would continue with Pickens and Neighbors. I think both these guys are going to have some good performances this week. Sit Najee Harris for the Steelers. The Giants have a pretty good run defense. Dexter Lawrence in the middle, etc. I think that they're going to, Brian Burns, they're going to, I think, shut Najee Harris down. But a stash candidate for this week would be Jalen Warren. And for similar reasons, I think that we saw Warren get a little bit more involved with Russell Wilson in terms of his passing ability, or his pass catching ability, because Fields was just not really getting it to the running backs in terms of passing the ball. He was kind of create a lot on his own. Rushing, which didn't really open up opportunities for the running backs, but Wilson is going to be dumping it off more. And if Harris continues to be ineffective, we could see more of Warren moving forward. All right, so didn't really get rapid fire like I would like to, but we will now move to the comments from the fans that have commented on this channel. Thank you so much to everybody who did. I really appreciate all of your support and your questions. It really, I really enjoy helping you guys with your teams, and ask any questions that you have, and I'm happy to answer them as best as I can. So we will start with questions from Dylan. We talked about this a little bit ago, but I want to talk about this question here about, do you think Jonathan Taylor stays with the Colts, and will Goodson take over if he leaves? So Jonathan Taylor is still under contract. I don't really see any reason why he would demand a trade unless things really go south with Anthony Richardson. So like organizations like the Colts, like they're pretty smart organizations in terms of their management and finding players that are effective on their team. I know they've not really done that at quarterback, but everywhere else they've been pretty good. And I think they recognize that Taylor is a great asset on that team, and they would not be trying to move him. I think there's a better chance that Goodson will not be on the Colts because he's a restricted free agent. They could look to draft somebody next year, so I think Goodson is really just going to be of value if Taylor gets injured, which, like I said, could be great value this season if Jonathan Taylor gets injured again, but there's still a long way to go next year in terms of projecting Goodson. Next, we will look at this question here is, when will the Ravens start to sit Derrick Henry more, and will Justice Hill be a running back to stash for end of the year? So stash, yes, because you want to make sure if you have Derrick Henry that you have Justice Hill. And he's already been effective just as a pass-catching running back anyway. I only really see Justice Hill having effective games, though, in situations where Baltimore is going to be trailing. So if you look at the games for Justice Hill throughout the season, when Baltimore has been dominating, did I say Cleveland earlier? I really hope I didn't. But when Baltimore is going to be running the ball and dominating, it's probably because they're playing Cleveland this week. I don't know. But when they're ahead, they're just going to keep giving it to Derrick Henry, and there's not going to be much room for Justice Hill. But when they're behind, I think that sets up well for Justice Hill to get involved. And obviously, if anything were to happen to Derrick Henry, then Hill would get injured. But I don't really see Derrick Henry's volume changing. I think he's locked in as a elite fantasy running back. All right, another question for long term. So Ashton Genty of Boise State is killing it right now. He's on pace to potentially break Barry Sanders' rushing record in college football. So Dylan's question is will he be drafted high next year? And do I do fantasy football rookie profiles? So I keep an eye on rookies in terms of which ones will be good to who could be good pros. But ultimately, I don't really make hard and fast opinions on how they will do in the NFL until they get drafted, because I want to see the situation. So just look at this past season. Michael Penix, a lot of people were very high on him. But he gets drafted to Atlanta, who already has Kirk Cousins, and we don't know when Penix is going to be starting. So stuff like that kind of kills rookies' value potentially. Could Penix be good if he was on the Broncos and maybe Bo Nix was on the Falcons? Well, possibly, yeah. But I think Genty, if he goes to a situation like Dallas, I think that will be great because they obviously need a running back, and he is especially explosive on a team that's got some weapons. That would be probably the best case scenario. But I also wouldn't be surprised if he gets picked up by a team that's just looking to add some depth. And because of that, there's just too much hypotheticals with him right now. But he's obviously somebody that is right now looking like he could be one of the best running backs as a rookie that we've seen for quite a while, maybe since Bijan Robinson 2 years ago. But I don't think that we can really say definitively how he's going to do until we see where he goes. When will Rico Dowdle take over the backfield? In my opinion, he already has. I think you just got to throw away that Detroit game. I know that Zeke Elliott got more carries than him last week, but they were just getting destroyed in that game. And I think that you just have to chalk that one up to just, a throwaway game. Dowdle is the more explosive running back on that team, and I think that we will see this week that he will do better and will be a little bit more reliable than he was in this past game against Detroit, which is an excellent team. And San Francisco, although they do have a good running game, I do think that Dowdle will get back involved again as the RB1. Do I think Bucky Irving finishes as the clear RB1 on the Bucks by the end of the season? No, because Rashod White is still there. Sean Tucker has involvement as well, and I think he clearly fell down to the third running back. But I think you're going to see a pretty even split between White and Irving throughout the season, so I don't think he'd be the clear number one. But again, he's still very valuable because he is productive in his limited touches that he does have. Would I keep Cameron Dicker or shop around for another kicker? I think Dicker is going to be a top 10 kicker easily rest of season because Chargers have limited capabilities at some positions that make it so that they can get into the red zone but not score. And because of that, it sets up well for Dicker to be successful. He's also got a good leg. I think if you have him, I would be trying to hold him, especially since he's already had his bye week. All right, other start-sit questions. Start Darnold, already played. Tua, Rodgers, or Trevor Lawrence. So this is close between Tua and Aaron Rodgers. So I would be going with, in this particular matchup, I would go Aaron Rodgers over Tua. I want to see how Tua does for at least 1 week. I think Aaron Rodgers we will see against the New England Patriots. I think he's going to have a great game. I would be putting Rodgers out there for this week against the New England Patriots, but it is close with Tua. Sometimes with stuff like that, you got to look at who your opponent has too, and maybe if he has Devonta Adams, then you want to go Tua so that it doesn't backfire if Rodgers has a great game and Devonta Adams also has a great game. But I think that Aaron Rodgers would be the better play in a vacuum. Cortland Sutton, Travis Etienne, or Tyrone Tracy. So even if Etienne plays, I would be playing Cortland Sutton for this week. Tyrone Tracy I like, but he's just not in a great position right now, and he gets a tough defense this week. If Devin Singletary gets injured, maybe that changes. But Cortland Sutton against the Panthers, I think that he's going to go off this game. I think he's going to play excellent. And I think that even though he had a goose last week, I think you can confidently put him back in. I would go Cortland Sutton. Laporta or Henry. And this is a tough decision because both guys I would try to start if you have them. But who would you start between the two of them? I would go Laporta because I think, as I said earlier, Jameson Williams is suspended now. Tennessee is vulnerable. I think you're going to see some more pass volume that goes Laporta's way that we have in the past. And Henry, yeah, you do like his volume too, but I don't think he has the upside of Laporta. And the other consideration as well is that maybe those targets will go back to Demario Douglas, which has happened before with Henry with other receivers where he's gotten a lot of volume 1 week, but not as much the next. So I think that Laporta, this sets up well for him. I know he's struggled, but I would be going Laporta over Hunter Henry for this week. And who do I like more long-term among Laporta, Myers, Etienne, Tracy, and Sutton? So I think long-term Etienne is number one for me on that list. I think next is still Laporta because of the age. He's still really young and he's in a great offense. So, things could break well for them where he gets more involved. Like maybe Jameson Williams has already been suspended twice, so maybe they could look to move on from him. So Laporta, I would still have him as number 2 on that list. Then I would go Tyrone Tracy because Sutton and Myers are both aging receivers that they're on their way out. But Tyrone Tracy is very talented, and hopefully they move on from Devin Singletary. They've improved that team, and Tyrone Tracy could be a very valuable running back moving forward. Then I would go Sutton and then Myers because of the team and situation with their quarterbacks. All right. I think I got all of your questions. Thank you, Dylan, for a lot of great questions as always. I really appreciate your support continually for this channel. And next we have a question from Swizz. Should I start Kelsey or Freiermuth this week in a PPR league? And should I start DeAndre Hopkins? So DeAndre Hopkins is not a bad start, first of all, because you get the Raiders, and I think there's a chance they could get DeAndre Hopkins involved. But he plays on the same team as Kelsey. And to me, Kelsey is easily a better start than Freiermuth for this week. So you could... The problem with playing 2 Chiefs is that, this isn't the Chiefs from like 2018 where they were just scoring 50 points a game. Mahomes had 5 touchdowns a game, etc. This is a offense that has struggled a lot this season. I believe they're averaging between like 20 and 17 to 20 fantasy or just total points this season. So there's a very good chance if you play both of them that neither of them will do well. So I would personally be trying to just bet on Kelce because I think he's still a better play than Freiermuth, even with that. And then if you try to see if you can find other receivers to put in other than Hopkins, so it doesn't set yourself up in a position to potentially crash hard. So just put all your eggs in Kelce's basket for this week. Hopkins is still great to have and see what happens, but for this week I'd be playing Travis Kelce against the Raiders and sit Hopkins. All right, and then a question from Tay. He is trying to figure out a flex for this week. He's got Dowdle, Odunze, Douglas, Eckler, and he also picked up Jalen McMillan. So those are all guys that are kind of on the fringe that you don't really feel great about starting any of them necessarily, but sometimes you're in this position in fantasy where you have to start one of them. So of those, I would be going Dowdle because all those guys have question marks of how much volume they're going to get in the game, except for Rico. I think that he is the number one running back, and I think against San Francisco, you're going to see him more evolved, especially in the pass-catching game. I think Rico Dowdle has a bounce-back performance from what we've seen recently against Detroit. Just going through these other players, Odunze, like I said, he's the fourth wide receiver on that team. Doesn't really look like a great safe play. Talented, but not safe. Demario Douglas, hopefully he's the number one receiver, but he's also been inconsistent. I would wait and see what happens there. Austin Eckler has been explosive at times, but he's just not getting the touches. And now that we have Jeremy McNichols being effective too, I don't think that sets up well for Eckler against a tough Bears defense. And then McMillan, as I've already talked about earlier, he got 8 targets, but he only put up 16 yards with them. So we'll see what happens with that as well. I think if you had to rank these guys, I would go Dowdle and then McMillan, then Odunze, then Douglas, then Eckler. But I think that Dowdle is your best play for this week. All right. Well, that's all that I've got for this week for the questions. If you have any last-minute questions before week 8, comment below and I will answer it as soon as I can. And if you have any questions that you want answered in the next mailbag, comment that below as well, and you will be included in the week 9 mailbag coming out on Saturday next week. All right. Well, thank you for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Bye.